women right now, we're genuinely looking for a partner, someone who can support our growth and independence and not make us feel bad for wanting more out of our lives than just being a mother. And let me be clear, I'm not saying that we don't want to be mothers. I'm just saying I would argue that most women are wanting more out of their lives than what the world has traditionally told us we're good for. Hello, welcome in everyone. Let's get settled in, shall we? Because we have a lot to talk about today, okay? We have a lot to unpack. You know, this particular idea for an episode came to me after, of course, my many lived experiences in this life. But also, I kind of just recently had a realization that made me go, oh, that's why this is the way that it is. And I'm very much a person who likes to make sense of things that happen in my life and just obviously unpack it. I don't know. Maybe that's why I have a podcast that essentially unpacks everything wrong or right in society and wrong or right in my life. But I am very much a person who appreciates the why to the reason, if that makes sense. And recently, I have begun to take interest in this idea of human conditioning. And human conditioning, according to Google, all right, is the process by which behaviors, emotional responses, and thought patterns are modified or learned through interactions with the environment. And listen, there's a lot of things that could live under this umbrella of human conditioning. So today, I really just kind of want to focus on how technology has impacted our human conditioning in 3 areas that I would argue are the most prominent in today's world. But I also have some shared experiences that can contribute to the emphasis within each of these points. So here they are, okay? Culture, dating, and work life. And so when it comes to technology impacting human conditioning, I feel like these 3 points kind of stick out like a sore thumb. So let's get into it. But before we go any further, Deeves, you know, we have to get into my hot thought of the week, of course. And my hot thought of the week is just whatever is on my mind at the time that I'm recording this. So the hot thought of the week, I don't know if this has just been something that's immediately been on my mind as I've created this episode, or if it's something that I will continue to ponder longer than just this moment in time. But I'm tired. I'm tired and I'm frustrated. You know, I've put a lot of work into this podcast and I feel like it's going nowhere. And so I'm trying to stay really optimistic in this journey and trust that the right ears will find my content in time. But it's extremely hard to stay positive when, you know, you've been at something for months and have seen little to no results. And, you know, we're now moving into the summer and I'm ready to go out and do things. But then that leaves like little to no room for me to focus on my content and, you know, dive into my creativity a little bit more. And I know that with creativity, it always has ebbs and flows, right? Like for a while, I felt like I had all these great ideas and I was proud of everything I was putting out there. And now it's like pulling teeth to try to pick out a piece of content from my fucking brain that reaches my level of satisfaction. Because, you know, I have a problem sometimes with creating just to create. Like if I'm going to create something, I want it to be meaningful and intentional. But more recently, I think I'm like learning that not everything has to be so fucking serious all the time. You know, it's okay to just create something out of a necessity for content. It doesn't always have to be made with this high intention. I don't know if that's making sense, but I just wish that somehow I could pull more listeners in through the content that I'm posting on, let's say, social media, because I personally feel like my content is gold. And I'm obviously biased, but like, I feel like I'd be talking about real shit on here, and I'm very open and I'm authentic, and I just don't necessarily know how to pull people into this space. And I guess it's just taking me longer than I would like, but I'm just like, damn, I'd really like some help here, universe, I feel like I'm pushing myself every week, and it's like, I can't stop now, I can't just give up now. I feel like I've been too consistent and I have to keep going, but I'm tired and I'm frustrated, and yeah, that's my hot thought of the week. And I realized that it was very personal, but you know what? Deal with it. And let's get into the thick of the topic today. Here's the thing about our culture. The way we perceive our culture is not so black and white anymore. What I mean by that is that we view the world so much more broader than ever before because of social media and technology. We access parts of our world so much sooner, and we consume so much of it. And I would argue that the influence of technology has become the forefront of our culture today. In fact, without social media, I think people would still be heavily influenced by music, books, magazines, or whatever their parents were into. You see what I'm saying? Like, and I think all of those things can still be true. But what I'm saying is that this introduction of technology has now kind of ingrained itself into our culture. And I believe that a lot of things learned in this day and age come from our digital world. There's a lot less that's learned through some of these physical objects or environments and interactions, if that makes sense. And also, let me just say, I think it's really easy to understand. We all know what culture is, right? And we know how culture shapes us. But deeper than that, I feel like what we fail to see sometimes, or maybe fail to admit, is that there is actually a lot of depth to our culture and why things are the way that they are now. And it's due to a lot of the influences from our past, from previous generations. But because we live in such a fast-paced society, it's harder to kind of identify some of those deeper rooted messages or ideas because we are already on to the next trend or the next thing, the latest drama of influencers. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, for example, something that I think is deeply ingrained in our culture is the sexualization of women. I mean, for years, there's been this oversaturation of sexualizing women's bodies that I believe is still very much present today. And honestly, not even just sexualization of women's bodies, but just body image of women in general. And it feels like we are always so focused on what a woman should look like versus her actual feminine power and divinity that she brings into the world. So not only have women become extremely influenced by this, but also men in our society as well. Women have been continuously led to believe that their body has to fit in this exact mold, and it needs to have this exact shape for there to be likeness attached to you or for you to be attractive. And to men, it has placed this image of like unrealistic standards of what a woman should look like. And that's the main focus, right? It's almost as if they hold that as the expectation. And of course, I can't speak for men, but in my experience with them, I have found that there is this sort of lust factor that is at the forefront of my interactions, right? And I feel like this lust factor has contributed in the way in which they view women. It's almost like that's what they pay attention to first, right? The way I look comes before anything else I say or do. So I'm already being immediately judged by the way I look versus what I actually have to offer. Women's bodies have been put on this pedestal like it's a prize to be won, but not in a way that promotes the love of woman, but in a way that promotes the lust over women's bodies. And that's the problem. I mean, we can start back as early as the 1950s. Women were practically being exploited for their bodies with the launch of Playboy magazine. I mean, I'm sure, they are getting paid for this shit, but I'm just saying, that was a thing all the way back in the 50s. This hypersexualization of woman is just deeply rooted in our culture. And now, unfortunately, it has become a lot easier to get a hold of, which ultimately is part of what I feel like is contributing to the awful experiences awaiting in the dating world. And we'll get into that later. But the point that I'm trying to make is that most of how we interpret our culture today started somewhere deeper than we all are willing to understand or admit. Only now I feel like our culture is magnified because technology and social media is heavily influencing our ability to interact with our environment in the outside world. I almost feel like that sometimes I live more in that technology world than I even do in the outside world because we're being fed so much information all the time and everything is so accessible. And so much of modern day culture is navigating how to keep up with everything that's going on, whether it's the third cancellation of James Charles or the war in Iran trending on Instagram, or the cute little rescue cat video that you saw on Facebook. There's all this content that we are constantly trying to filter, but then there's also this expectation in our culture to honestly keep up with all that shit and stay in the know. Like, oh my God, you don't know that we just bombed Iran and now all of these gas prices are going up? Like, no, actually I didn't because I'm not on that side of TikTok or what, you know what I'm saying? And if you're not in the know about some of these things, you kind of feel left out. So it almost forces you to kind of get on board with what everyone else is, talking about and paying attention to. But then I feel like it almost makes it harder for you to form your own opinion about everything because you're just watching what everyone else is piggybacking off from, or, you're talking to your friends about it. And I think it just leaves a little bit less room to make your own opinion about certain things, because if you're only on this side of TikTok, you're only getting this side of that information. And I honestly have no idea if I'm making any type of sense with this and where I'm going right now, but I truly believe that a lot of our culture is now learned through the eyes of technology. Our human conditioning and how we view culture is no longer being experience through the eyes of another person or a physical encounter or interactions in your environment, but it's more so coming from this 5-inch screen. And I just think that's crazy. And hopefully I explained this point correctly in the way that I was thinking about it. And I honestly can't talk about it anymore because my brain is starting to hurt. But hopefully what I said was making sense. Let's move on. Okay. I obviously have to talk about dating and how this has evolved in our human conditioning today, because holy shit, is it bad out there? Is it bad, bro? And dating in this day and age just so happens to be one of my favorite things to talk about, partly because I feel like I have so much shit to say about it. But here's the truth. Dating today is unpredictable, yet predictable, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, I would argue, and I'm speaking from a woman's perspective, I might add, but I would argue that most of us enter the dating world and we are apprehensive, but hopeful, right? Most of us have been out there for a while, we've dipped our toes in, but every time we go in past our waist, all hell breaks loose, and all of a sudden, we're swimming back to shore because somebody's son doesn't know how to fucking swim without a floaty. You know what I'm saying? I'm not sure if that makes sense, but the point is, we try and we get burned, and it's well, what the hell? how do I even get back out there and try again if I'm just continuing to go through the same experiences over and over again? And maybe that's, a testament to lessons that I need to learn within myself. But it's like, do I hold on to hope, or do I just say to hell with all of it and just lay my ass on the beach? You know what I'm saying? Like, fuck the water. That shit is for the birds. I don't want to be in charge of teaching somebody's son how to swim anymore. Like, I don't want to fucking do that shit. And I recognize that I'm going a little overboard with the beach comparison. And if you caught that, I'm sure you did. Now I'm just being obnoxious. But in all seriousness, I think there is a big dilemma happening in the dating world right now. And I believe a lot of that has to do with our conditioning. Now, yes, I think it's all good and fair that we recognize everyone has their own individual lived experiences when it comes to how they grew up watching people be intimate romantically, whether that was through TV shows or movies, or how they saw their parents together and how they grew up receiving love as a child, right? All good and fair. I do think everyone's individual experience does affect how they show up in the dating world. However, I think what has the potential to be even more telling is the gap that technology has created between men and women, or just people in general in the dating world, due to this kind of overconsumption or overexposure to media and just to content in general. We are so, again, oversaturated, which I think in turn makes us very desensitized. Like, we are a very desensitized society, bro. And I might start hating on my generation a little bit, but like, I almost feel like there is this kind of lack of empathy that lives within my generation, because we grew up watching horrible shit, I feel like. And I'm being a little bit dramatic, but if anything, maybe we didn't watch it all the time, but we had access to it. When all this shit came out, there were no restrictions on a lot of these platforms. Especially, I think of like Vine, right? I mean, shit, the whole platform practically shut down because it became a porn site. Like, dead ass. I mean, it's the harsh truth. R.I.P. Vine. But honestly, I think it might even be worse now. I was talking to somebody the other day, and he was telling me that their niece had seen the video footage of Charlie Kirk being shot. Like, bro, I didn't even see that shit. And his niece is like fucking 8, 10 years old. What? And so the point I'm trying to make is that there's just a lack of emotional, I think, intelligence. I don't know if that's the right word, but an emotional empathy, because we've just been so oversaturated by things similar to that. And the things that we experience in real life almost feel a little bit numb or uninteresting, because we've already kind of flooded our brain with the latest drama on Love Island, or went down a rabbit hole about the Epstein files. And I just feel like a lot of human interaction has been replaced with keeping tabs on the people in our social feeds or the drama that's happening in our social feeds. And so it's like, why ask so-and-so about what's going on in their life when I have access to 100 day in the life videos of somebody online that I can watch to keep myself stimulated. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I think there is an effort piece that's there, and people have just become lazy. And okay, maybe I'm being a little bit insensitive, but it's just like the capacity to hold a conversation with somebody nowadays is dwindling by the second. And it's painful. Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation with somebody, and it's not that there's anything wrong with who they are as a person. You know what I'm saying? They could be the nicest person, but like, talking to them is just so painful because they are so boring. And, we live in a world where we're constantly being stimulated. So if somebody's not stimulating the conversation, I'm fucking bored, right? And I think also we are heavily distracted too. Like, I was just having a really great conversation the other day with one of my friends, but all of a sudden we both get distracted by something in our surroundings and we're like Doug from Up. I swear to God, we're like squirrel. It's like, fuck. We can't even hold a conversation without being so easily distracted or just leaving it at the surface level because it just takes so much effort to stay engaged. And it takes effort to listen to someone. And I'm concerned that people are starting to lose that curiosity when it comes to human interaction. You know, like nobody wants to go there. And that's why I think it's become so unbelievably frustrating in the dating world. And what I am hearing online from a lot of women is just the absolute disconnect that happens between men and women. Here's the thing, okay? Women right now, we are getting to a point where we want to be emotionally stimulated. Like when I go out on a date with a man, I genuinely am wanting to make a connection with you. It's not about getting a free meal or taking advantage of the opportunity. You know, we are seeing if there is potential to keep your energy in my life, to put you in my life and add to each other's lives, really. You know, women are not in a space anymore where we need to rely on men for stability. We've been breaking away from these stereotypical gender roles that men need to be this sole provider and women need to be the sole caretaker. Like, no. Women are independent enough to keep our quote unquote needs met, you know, financially or whatever. We're genuinely looking for a partner, someone who can support our growth and independence and not make us feel bad for wanting more out of our lives than just being a mother. And let me be clear, I'm not saying that we don't want to be mothers. I'm just saying I would argue that most women are wanting more out of their lives than what the world has traditionally told us we're good for. And I would argue that a lot of men feel intimidated by this because they have grown up being told that they need to be the provider and they're the ones who, you know, step in and bring in the security and that's all there is to it. So now there's that disconnect between men and women because women are craving that emotional stimulation and emotional support over this, you know, security and financial support. And so I think we're getting to a point where men and women really don't understand what each other want out of a romantic relationship. You know, like there's those conversations are not being had, or people don't go into dating having those intentions be shared, right? Like, so, and again, I'm just speaking on my own opinions and observations. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's right, but I do believe that men in this day and age really lack a lot of that emotional intelligence because for so long they've been told not to show emotion and that it's weak and that being vulnerable is unmanly and that crying makes you a pussy. Like, and that as a man, you always have to be tough and assert your dominance and never show fear. And this isn't anything new, right? It's like this toxic masculinity, again, something that has been around for a very long time. It's deeply rooted in our culture. But I think the addition of social media has only amplified these expectations for men and women. And that is why I think men and women find it extremely hard to be vulnerable with one another. You know, men because they don't want to come off as weak or too feminine, and women because they feel like they have to perform or play the role that a woman is supposed to play. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I think a lot of men aren't, you know, having these emotionally deep conversations. You know, it's not like they're hitting their homeboys up and talking about something super, super deep. And maybe they are. And maybe they do have a couple friends who they get deep with. But at the same time, I don't know if they're actively engaging in that enough. And I think that women are a lot of the times. We're emotional beings, right? And again, just expressing my opinion on all this shit. And until I meet a man who can change my perspective on that, this is where my stance is staying right now. And just from my own perspective in the dating world. And I think it's also frustrating for women because we are getting to a point where we don't want to do all this heavy emotional lifting anymore. It's wild to me how many men can so easily separate their emotions from their desire. Like, for example, okay, I'll use my personal experience, obviously, to emphasize my point. Plus, my failed dating stories also make for some good laughs. So, anyway, I started talking to this guy, okay? I actually pursued him. Mistake number one, ladies. But we hit it off great, We both shared similar interests and hobbies, so in a way, our lives kind of started to just integrate into one another's. And at first, I'm kind of just sitting back. I'm enjoying the experience. I feel like this guy is super into me. He's consistent. He's actively voiced that he wants me to be open and, feel like I can talk to him about things. And I'm like, cool, love that. Flash forward, we're about 2.5 months in at this point, and I'm kind of getting to a point like, all right, well, where is this going? What are we doing? We see each other every week. We're incorporating each other into our routines. Like, where is this going? So I'm under the impression that I have a safe space to share how I'm feeling because it was voiced that it was okay for me to do that, right? Wrong. Okay. I finally work up the courage to just be like, hey, this is where I'm at. I'd like to take this further. Let me know where you're at. He acknowledges the message, but says he just needs some time to think. Cool. Fine. I'm good with that. You know what I mean? Next day arrives. Oh, he's getting distant. We all know where this is fucking going, right? And I've been down this road many a times to know that this man is getting ready to ghost me. Sweet. Fucking sweet. And sure enough, ghosts me the following day. After 3 months of playing fucking house and being intimate and spending all this time together, it's crickets. And I'm just like, interesting, bro. Like, I would have had so much more respect for you if you would have just said, you know what? I appreciate that you shared that with me, but I'm just not in a space to take this any further. Okay? Would have had so much more respect for you. Cool. Now I have clarity and I can move on with my life. But instead, you took the easy way out and you ran away. And then you had the audacity to text me 3 weeks later talking about WYD. The fuck? What do you mean? What do you mean, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, bro, first off, the audacity. Second off, you don't even have the respectability to come back and take accountability or address the fucking situation. Grade A avoidant, if I've ever seen one. But my point is, I just felt like he wanted me to do all the heavy emotional lifting. But when I wanted that reciprocated, I feel like that confronted something in him that he was not ready to face. And in all honesty, his behavior, his silence towards the end, just taught me everything that I needed to know about this boy. He told me everything that I wanted to hear in order to gain access to me for his own desires, and looking back, I'm like, there probably weren't any feelings involved for him. There was no meaning behind his words because half the time they weren't even followed up by his actions. And it's a hard truth that I've had to swallow, but that's the reality that I feel like a lot of women find themselves in. We have this desire to take things further and to develop something sturdy, while a lot of men, I feel like, are very avoidant with their emotions, but they feed into their own desires instead. And I'll say it again, for years, women have been objectified, questioned for their intelligence and categorized as only good for cooking and cleaning, or that women are nothing more than machines for producing children. And when this storyline has been around for so long, it makes it extremely hard to redefine the narrative, and is what I believe has contributed to the behavior of how men treat women today. Men don't see women as highly valuable intellectual beings with goals and morals and, strength. Men see us exactly the way the media and culture has painted us for so many years. And this has been a very long, dragged out point, but it's important that we're having this conversation because the impact that technology has had on our human conditioning in today's world of dating has made it extremely hard to even date. Because now we've created terms like the talking stage and situationships. And the actual dating part doesn't seem to happen until there's a real conversation about what the fuck's going on, There's just this general avoidance of what it would actually mean to commit to somebody. And we've normalized avoidance in dating. This disconnect between men and women is so wide. And people, again, are becoming less and less engaged in conversations. We've become extremely desensitized to the real world. Not to mention, we've become extremely distracted, making it that much harder to actually hold on to the conversation. So I don't know. What do we do? It's kind of just feels like we're fucked at this point. But I digress. And let's move on before I get pissed off. So I want to talk about how technology is impacting our human conditioning when it comes to the workplace. And honestly, you guys, getting into this point, I might be a little less amped up about it because I would argue that technology has actually kind of enhanced our work lives, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself here. So first of all, let's cut straight to the obvious impactor, AI. All right. AI has completely changed how the corporate world works. We now have AI running entire systems for companies and putting together strategic operations. There are entire companies that offer AI systems and programming specific to your field of work. I mean, shit is crazy how fast this artificial intelligence wave is making its way into our everyday lives. And I got to make sure that I keep this within the lines of work life because I could go off on a whole nother tangent about the effects of AI outside of our work lives, but we'll save that for another time. And now let me be the first to admit I use AI every day in my job. I'm not necessarily proud of it, but also it has proven to be extremely helpful for me. Being a digital content creator in my line of work, using AI helps me kind of streamline my posting strategy and has saved me a ton of time, genuinely. It's just especially nice for things like captions, for example. Before I had to use my brain to come up with something to say. And when you have so much content, now it's nice that I can just be like, hey, make me a content about this. I can use that creative effort that I was using to put into my captions. I can use that and put it into my actual work, my actual content. Does that make sense? But how does this relate to human conditioning? Well, and actually, this makes me extremely terrified, but now I think we have become a lot more reliant on technology in the workplace because, like I said, it's streamlining tasks for us. Something that used to take us 30 minutes has now turned into less than 10. And in hindsight, that all looks good and fair on paper because people are getting more shit done. There's not as much tasks that don't get accounted for or that are missed anymore because AI has kind of been able to help fill some of those gaps in our inefficiency and make things easier. However, this also has the potential to increase that reliance, if you will. And if we get to a place where people no longer know how to do, that specific task in their job field, then we're fucked. Because if we are relying on AI to create something, especially if it's vital to the operation of the company or business or, God forbid, specific job title, then we're basically giving up a part of our humanity, I think. I mean, I just don't like the idea of putting that much trust into technology. And then it's like, well, where does that leave us? Do we just become so dumbfounded and lazy that we just make AI do everything? That doesn't seem right. I mean, fuck. And listen, I am the first to complain about the 9 to 5. I think it's extremely unhealthy. And we have an extremely unhealthy relationship with our work lives. But at the same time, I can't imagine that work, the work that I'm doing, being replaced by AI. That would completely take away my creative experience. And you guys know how I feel about creativity. We were born to create. Everything around us was once an idea that a human had. I mean, even fucking AI, right? And so my biggest fear is that we are becoming conditioned to rely on the very technology we made to do the things people in our generation already know how to do. But what about all the people that come after us? Will they be conditioned to pour their trust into artificial intelligence because there's no one else left around to teach them? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's a scary thing to think about. The other thing that I want to mention too is that the majority of jobs in the workforce use technology in some fashion, whether it be a medical device that gets hooked up to a machine to keep you alive, or maybe it's a computer that tracks how fast production is happening, or maybe it's a camera that records visually pleasing imagery. I don't know. But there are a lot of uses of technology throughout various occupations, and I grew up in a time where that was very normal. But sometimes I'm like, I can't imagine how weird it must have been for my grandma when she first saw a TV come out, And I would be very curious to talk to somebody from the boomer generation about this stuff because I feel like their perception would be so crazy, how this use of technology, especially in the workplace, has just been this normal for so long. And so I fear that AI will eventually take that place of normalcy too. I mean, I think it already is. And the kids who are being born now will get to be my age and have been conditioned so much to use AI that they won't think anything different, So anyway, shit is wild. And the thing about this use of technology in our work life, I feel like, is limiting the social interactions that you can create in your work life. And I know there are some people out there who just want to get in, get out, do their job, and be done with it. But also, like, if you're going to be there for 8 hours of your life every day, some human interaction would be good for you. And so my job, for example, is what I would call 70% desk job and 30% out in the field. I feel like I would prefer less time at my desk, but that's just the reality of being a content creator. You have to edit all the goddamn content that you have to get. But there are days where I just don't leave my desk. And I think part of our conditioning growing up has been to sit down, do the work, turn it in. And maybe this doesn't so much relate to the technology piece, but I think it's still relevant to this conversation. We have been conditioned our whole entire lives to almost operate like a machine. We learn in school how to complete assignments and tasks and not so much how to do things, like how to pay rent or how to do taxes. Like, these were never things that we learned. It was read this book, write a report, or solve this math problem and turn it in. Like, looking back, it just felt so intentional. Like, we had all this busy work and there wasn't a lot of room for creative expression or intentional problem solving. And now, as someone who's been in the workforce for the past 5 years, I'm starting to see the correlation between work environments and, our school curriculum. We are conditioned to perform a job, not to think for ourselves or make our own paths. We're shoved this lie that college is the only path for you. And I do think it's getting better. But our generation, right? We're shoved this lie that college is the only path. And in order to make any quote unquote real money, you at least need a 4-year degree. Doesn't matter what it is, but as long as you have a degree. And I just think that's bullshit. And this conditioning has become get in, do the work, turn it in. And it just promotes what I would call a very unseasoned lifestyle, if you will. Like, where's the zest? Where's the excitement or passion for what you do? And I'm grateful that I'm in a position that I do get that creative freedom and I am passionate about what I do. But I would argue that there's a lot of people out there who are unhappy in their careers because they don't feel valued or seen as a person, or they're just not passionate about the work that they do. They're just there to complete the tasks of that job. And I believe that conditioning starts in grade school. And then the addition of technology just further pulls us away from, number one, having that human interaction, but also makes us less apprehensive to ask questions when, it's like, why would I ask Susie when I can just ask AI? Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. And I think I've made my point. So let's move on. All right. You already know what time it is. It's time for the real, authentic woman of the week. My raw of the week. And my real, authentic woman of the week is a woman who I highlight, who I believe has the qualities of a real, authentic woman. And also, most of the time relates to what we're talking about today. And I got to be honest, I was actually struggling with who I was going to pick today because I just didn't know how I was going to find somebody who related to kind of the things that we were getting into today. But it was good for me because I actually got outside of my comfort zone and did a little bit of research, and I found a really amazing woman. And so, without further ado, my real authentic woman of the week is Katherine Johnson. Now, a little bit about Miss Katherine, okay? She was extremely pivotal in the early days of NASA and was actually one of the first Black women to work as a NASA scientist. And if you've ever seen the movie Hidden Figures, Katherine's character is played by Taraji P. Henson, who is also the main character of the film. And if you haven't seen it, it's actually a really great movie. It's obviously based on a true story. But if you've never seen it, it's about these 3 Black women scientists at NASA, Katherine, of course, and then Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson. So the movie kind of unpacks how their findings ultimately led to the launch of astronaut John Glenn into orbit. And honestly, it's because of them that our nation's confidence in the quote-unquote space race turned around at the time. And it honestly took the world by shock. Everyone was like, whoa, what? But back to Katherine, okay, back to my real authentic woman of the week. She held this job title of human computer, okay? And according to Wikipedia, for those of you who don't know, people whose title was labeled human computer basically meant that they were able to compute mathematical calculations before electronic calculators were even a thing. So Miss Katherine was a smart-ass cookie, okay? Because my ass, okay? I received an F in math class, babe, okay? Not a damn clue about math. Not my fucking thing. So to think that humans were able to conduct calculations without any form of technology whatsoever is just like kind of crazy to me. But the reason why I chose Katherine today is because not only is she a physical example of our potential outside of technology, I mean, this woman literally helped calculate trajectories of major space flights and paved the way to understanding aerospace dynamics, which is insane considering this woman did it without a computer. I mean, she was working on Apollo 11 and Apollo 13. Like, this woman was extremely talented. But she also had to break through a lot of that discrimination, not only as a woman, but a Black woman at that, And so there's a line that I'd like to quote from her that I think just really emphasizes the time in which she lived, because mind you, she was working at a time where segregation and discrimination were very much present. Okay, we're talking about the 50s and the 60s, right? So here it is. We needed to be assertive as women in that day. Assertive and aggressive, and the degree to which we had to be that way depended on where you were. I had to be. First of all, period. What? And I've just been so moved by researching her. I've just been so moved by her work and just how she was during that time, because for so long, and even especially during that time, women were just often casted aside and not taken seriously. But she stood her ground. She made herself known and really just asserted herself despite how the rest of the world was trying to paint her as a Black woman. You know what I mean? And when we relate to what we're talking about today, she was breaking through the conditioning of people's beliefs at that time. I mean, she just didn't give a fuck. She was like, you know what? This is who I am. I know my shit, And she wasn't about to let some idiot named Henry degrade her credibility. So that's my real authentic woman of the week. Catherine has since passed as of 2020, but her story should never die. We need to be talking about the women who came before us and how their strength paved the way for a lot of us today. We're standing on the backs of a lot of these women who were pivotal in history. And so I'm just extremely moved by her life and what she was able to accomplish at the time that she did, despite the heavy discrimination. And I think it's just so important that we bring attention to women like Catherine. So anyways, watch Hidden Figures, do some of your own research, and put your friends on to this real authentic woman. Well, you guys, wow, we covered a lot of fucking ground. I mean, I feel like this is something that I could talk about forever, the impact of technology on our human conditioning. It's just, it's been an hour. I've been yapping for an hour. But this was an extremely fun episode. I really wanted to get into this topic because I've been noticing how my human conditioning is present in my own life. And I don't know, I really wanted to bring some awareness to how we are letting technology kind of interfere with everything else in our life and how it's affecting us, just from our overusage and how it's taking away from our experience in the outside world. And I think it's important that we really start to acknowledge that piece and like how technology is impacting our human conditioning, because I don't think people even understand the severity of it. Like, honestly, we've become so trapped by our devices that everything out there in the real world can feel boring. We rely on technology for dopamine. It's become people's vices, and we're so overstimulated with content in this culture that forming our own opinion about anything feels wrong or would require too much effort. So we stay neutral, we follow the trends, and we jump on to the preferred belief according to the internet, or according to what side you are on the internet. And not to mention, dating in this day and age has become extremely painful because no one is willing to have the hard conversations or be vulnerable, because men and women have been conditioned into believing these certain things about each other and about themselves. And that leaves a huge disconnect because, again, everyone's too afraid to talk about it. And so finally, we should all be extremely concerned by the integration of AI in the world of the workplace. And just in general, but specifically what I'm talking about today in the workplace, because how far is too far? And let's not ignore that we've also been conditioned to act like machines. So I would just encourage you all to take a look at how technology has conditioned you and how is it conditioning you. Be present in the moments where you jump to your phone and ask yourself, wait a minute, why am I doing this again? And start asking the deeper questions about technology. What purpose is this serving in my life? Am I reliant on this device? And just sit with those questions. It's important that we acknowledge how things in our life are affecting us and then just act accordingly after. Let me close out this episode because I've been yapping, babes. I've been chatting away. And if you've made it this far, again, I appreciate you guys listening. You're a real one. Please like, share, follow my shit, put people on to my shit, because this podcast is dope. So anyway, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.